Hello, and welcome to the People Grow Places podcast, where we explore the virtuous circle of people, growth, and place. Brought to you by Grow Places and hosted by our founder, Tom Larson.
Shiro, hi, how are you doing today? Thank you very much for joining me.
I'm very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Yes, exactly. Well, I was going to say that this is the first of this series. It's the first one I've done where I haven't already had a relationship with a guest before. So we've actually met today, which is great, and I'm really excited to kind of dive into an understanding about you personally and what drives you in the work that you do. So thanks for taking the time to have this conversation today.
No, it's my pleasure. It's always great to talk about what drives you, what you're passionate about, and I think that design has always been the root of my interest from a very early stage in my life, and art, and I just gravitated to that, and I just felt it provided some kind of tranquility and peaceful expression, some calm within me, and so I just followed that through. I particularly naturally got interested in how people interact with space and design. So I'm a very people person, and how they relate to design was very important for me. And that interest was only sharpened when I went to Milan to study interior architecture after my high school. And it was a whole different level about how spaces are curated around people, how important that is, ergonomics, emotional. And so, taking from that and coming here to London, which I came to study an MA in design, and I did a paper on culture and the living space. And the reason I did that is because I saw the disconnect between spaces and people back home in Nairobi, as opposed to how that was designed in Italy. And I just pursued that line of inquiry, and every time I went down that road, I just discovered there's more to do, more to talk about, and my passion just continued to grow. And so that's how I started, really in the back of my mind all the time, trying to see how people interact with space and how design can respond to people more. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, thank you for that summary. It's really good to hear. And as you say, the interface between design and people is not always one that's as clear as you would kind of expect, is it? And you're also looking at art, aren't you? And the role that art and visual kind of media plays in that dialogue. And I'm really interested. You mentioned your background. You're from Nairobi. You've obviously studied in London and Milan and other places. And so, take me back a little bit to growing up, and how do you feel maybe those experiences have kind of shaped what you do now, and how can you maybe look at places like London, places like Milan, major Western cities in maybe a different light in terms of how people live their lives, really?
Yeah, I mean, having grown up in Nairobi, lived in different cities, you're always an outsider. You're always trying to read the life of the city you've just come to live or experience. And as you do that, you look at the spaces, at least for me, and that gives me a reading of the cultural behaviors, interests, and the differences and the similarities. And so being always in a different setting that I didn't grow up in has forced me to look for those markers that help me kind of connect with a city and a people. I feel I've done quite well, and I did so because of the power of art, I believe, because when you see the art in a completely different culture that you've never encountered before, and you connect with it, it's like you get a window into what these people like, you get a window in what they feel, and you get that human connection. And so art was was instrumental in me able to read and feel comfortable, especially because there are more similarities than differences, actually. Huge similarities in food, different versions of making a certain type of dish, different ways of appreciating, of celebrating traditions, but very similar as well. So I kind of got very much focused on what are the similarities, and art was able to create. It was for me a language of reading the different cultures, and I think so knowing the power of art in melding communities, how important it is of all ages. There's no wrong way to read it or experience it. I just feel it has to be integral in any development or any big city, small village, whichever size. I think it has to be there for that charm of the people to come out.
Yeah, thank you. And you mentioned there about, it's often about similarities as well as about differences in people fundamentally, and you mentioned, you know, these markers to connect cities or places with people. I think that's a really nice expression. What would you say are those kind of markers then that you kind of gravitate to in your process, really?
Well, I can use because I've just come in from Nairobi, where I was born in, and over the last 2-3 years, a lot of development has taken place. So I was having to I go there often, but still the development is so fast that I was trying to relearn the city I grew up in. And the markers that I looked for, sadly, were not art related, which I wish they were, but it was like looking for a specific building, a specific place we gathered to eat, the national park. You know, you can see I was hanging on to those things that never moved. I was hanging on to those things that defined the city for me. Otherwise, it risked being a completely different place. So I think that's just an experience, my personal experience of recent, that just reinforces how I feel those markers are important to people living in those cities and those communities. I also think that the markers are a sense of identity. So if the nature of those markers, if they relate to the people who live in that city, it gives them a form of an identity, and you more proudly talk about my city, my town, my village. What makes it yours? It's because it kind of reflects things about you. You know, art that you like, or artists that you knew or grew up in the place, or traditions that you did. If any of those cultural narratives are picked up by the environment, it gives a sense of identity, which is a very powerful, grounding, secure feeling every person, I believe, should have.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sense of belonging is a really interesting one, isn't it? And, we talk about development, and development is an activity which is both sort of past looking and also forward looking. And as you're speaking there, there's an element of kind of like memory, isn't there? Like individual memory or societal memory, which shapes that sense of belonging, and art can kind of tie into that. But also, if you project forward, art is often a very much a kind of forward-leaning thing, isn't it, about change? So you've got kind of memory and change as these quite interesting dynamics in those markers. Is there anything you want to add to that, particularly maybe about the change aspect that art has in a place?
Yes, the change, it creates aspiration. It shows where a community can go. And artists within the community are very good at projecting that. They've got the pulse of the people of the city. Yeah. And I think using artists who are community orientated and can be able to kind of tell us or share what the community would like to see or what the community hopes for, I think that's amazing. So that you can have, it's immeasurable to understand the power of inspiration when people feel like they can get to where they can get to their dreams. And if that can be visualized in any sort of way, and that's how you talk about change. And change is talking about what we don't want in this community and what we want in this community, and where we're going. That sense of progress, that sense of taking ownership of their environment is very important.
Yeah, and just picking up on, making lots of notes and just picking up on one of the things you mentioned there, you know, this idea that how people can get to their dreams, I think is a really, really lovely, really human way of describing some of these things. And I can tell just speaking to you now that you naturally come at it from this kind of emotive, more human, more experiential side of what our actions are inducing in people. And I think that's a really, really nice way to look at things. And, you know, the idea about creating something that is kind of authentic to that place, to those people, is really, really important. And so are there any other ways that you think that places can kind of be most authentic to the people? Obviously there's through these kind of maybe these installations, but I'm talking particularly about maybe like the process, about how you get to that result, whether it's through dialogue or consultation, or how would you think about that in respect to maybe art in place as opposed to necessarily the buildings?
So art is one way of manifesting everything, but I feel like if a community has something very strong about it, it's almost impossible to miss. You just have to look in the right places and ask the right questions, and there are always going to be those community leaders or artists who kind of drive this through. So I find from my experience with trying to explore different cultures, coming through the artists who are more or less the custodians in terms of how you document this. So I think that there are different elements of doing it. And when you talk about art, people think of installations and they think of beautiful square pieces, but sometimes it could just be as a place for performance art. Mm-hmm. It could be something that the community celebrates that's depicted in a different architectural aspect. It doesn't have to look like art, but so if you think about it, the reading of somebody who's lived in that community will have a better understanding of different elements. Somebody new might just take the surface elements of it, but there'll be different layers in which you can engage the community, some less visible, some more obvious, some less obvious. So I think there are different, not just pure art and installations, but there are different architectural elements that can go into, that can resonate with the community, certain aspects of the traditions. Even creating, if you think about architectural space, it can look as an empty space to anybody, but if that space is taken over during a certain period of time by the community activity, it's no longer an empty space to anyone walking down that street, because every time they walk past it, they'll just imagine what takes place there, and somebody new might see something empty and wonder why that is. So there, even that empty architecture space, it's also for me a way of piece of art, spatial art that allows something to take place. So
yeah, and as you say, there's this element of allowing things to happen beyond the architecture, beyond almost whether it's the piece of art or whether it's the installation or whether it's the piece of theatre. And not trying to control everything that goes into that white space or to that public space, and just allowing life to kind of take it in.
Exactly, in the different layers. I think that in every regeneration project, there has to be what is a cultural program around it that's not contrived, that it has to look, it could even be just very subtle, but that subtlety could be very rich. So I think, there has to be that program going on to give it life. And I always like referencing when we go to very charming European cities or villages, there's something extraordinary about it, and it's because of those celebrations that take place. If you think about those, that you look at the pictures and then you go to the place, and they don't have to be happening at that moment in time, but you just imagine so that the next time you see them on TV, you can say, I was in that place. Yeah. So there's so many ways of living. There's so many ways of absorbing what the city energy of a people within an environment, whether new or old. There's so many ways of doing it, so many layers you can build in.
Can I just ask you a little bit about, cities as places, particularly large cities like London, are very multicultural. There's different cultural dynamics. Cheek by jowl, butting up against each other, living all as part of one community or part of one city. But within that, there's a fine balance to play, isn't there, between kind of celebrating and recognizing individual elements of the culture, which could be, as you say, quite understandable if you spend some time there, but they also could be, quite hard to detect, or unless you're very kind of integrated within those cultures, up against other such cultures. How do you see that in terms of the role potentially that art can play to speak specifically to certain demographics of people, but also maybe to sit alongside other perspectives and other voices?
I think that's one of the most extraordinary things about London. It has that problem, but I think it's an opportunity as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got those big cities where you've got people who come in for work, people who live in there, people who work there, people who are there for a certain period of time. How do you get all of this to work? And I think it's trying to understand, read the mood and the energy of the city, and trying to see on what level does everyone appreciate something. Because if you go into London, even though it's an international city, you want to see the different parts of London, and you want to feel like you've moved from one London to another, one part of London to another. So I think it's understanding, what does everybody appreciate? What affects us all? We're all in the same space. How do we bring those things that we're all going to experience and we're all exposed to? And then see how they can. So it means talking up to artists who, for example, have had a very awkward experience of London, and seeing how they project us to how their vision of us is, laughing at ourselves is something that's great too. So I think looking for those elements within the cities, that the intersections of the different people who experience the city, the different demographics, what do we experience in common? And how do we make it all our city at the same time? Yeah,
absolutely, and that richness, that layering, and that's actually what makes the places interesting, isn't it? And relevant to people. And as you say, there are some kind of base human emotion, human needs that probably are quite common, but then actually allowing spaces and places to actually celebrate the diversity and celebrate the difference of place as well.
And because art is a way that I've learned is a way to get into understanding people who are different from you, who have different challenges and experiences. So art can be used to educate us about each other within a community. So you can give an example of the people who work in the city. If art is to express the pressure these people are under, you find the people who live there and see this invasion of this city kind of thing, like, wow, this is actually what goes through their minds. This is actually what their fears are, their joys are. This is what they enjoy. So then when they start humanizing all the demographics and people learn about each other, it's a way of making people kind of want to live together and understand each other better. So it's a way of connecting different demographics within one space, such as London.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to step back from that for a second, and I'm actually going to read out a quote from you, which, if that's okay, just to kind of unpack together. This is around, so art in architecture challenges the assumption that community engagement plays a negative role in development. Inclusive art commissioning is a powerful tool in creating social and economic value when it supports meaningful connections between people and place. I think we've kind of unpacked quite a lot of that already. But just to frame it again, this maybe picking up on this point about this negative role that maybe the community engagement has in development, or at least a perception of that. Can you maybe kind of elaborate on that a little bit, and with a view to saying, okay, well, from your perspective, how do you think these processes could be enriched to actually bring people and place and then the development industry and projects closer together?
Yeah, I think historically, unfortunately, there has been, trying to accommodate the needs of a community where development wants to go into have been seen as obstacles. And I think there has just not been a platform that has been able to have good discussions for both sides to communicate. They all want the same thing. That's my view. A developer would like their project to be really embraced by the community. It adds value to it. It future-proofs it. It becomes something of a landmark that people want to keep, shield. On the other hand, a community wants to feel like they have created something and they want to be respected when it comes into the community. They want their voices to be heard. They want to hear they want change as well. They want progress. And so they all want the same thing. And so I think what from my standpoint, it's very clear to me that it's just the right framework that is lacking for these two different communities and developers to talk about. So coming from architectural background, I understand the constraints of developers. They've got budgets, deadlines. They've got to develop on. They've got investors who have certain requirements. So there are all those constraints, and therefore those constraints, if they can be, they're all malleable into something that could fit within what the community dreams are. How does it fit with the community? And the community say, okay, this is a development. There are simple things that developers have done, which is give local people jobs. But then after the development, it's gone, right? They're not there anymore. What are the opportunities for growth within the community that can be easily accommodated by the development, and therefore both are going to benefit. So I think that the negative tradition relationship between the two has just been unfortunate, and the lack of hand-holding, if you like. So we have different stages that we've developed in our art and in architecture processes, coming from zero, which is even before you've planned out anything as a developer, how do you get a reading of the community that you want to explore to develop in, up until whereby you've already built the building, it's there, but it's struggling to connect to the community. How do you engagement with the community? And in between that, there's all the planning and brainstorming. So we come in as an external resource or consultant who is there to look out for opportunities that can satisfy both the stakeholders and the community, and make sure that it's seamless. So quite making sure that communities understand what is achievable in a certain project, and the stakeholders understand, this is really long-term benefits, especially if you're phasing out a project into phase 2 and 3. This is an investment in the community, which will have long-term rewards. So I think it's just painting that picture, because there is no development that wants to be a problem in the community, and there's no community that doesn't want development. So they just have to learn how to dance together in a synchronized way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so at Grow Places, we're just literally embarking on first major new project in a very diverse community with lots of different perspectives. And so if you were to sort of give your view on how that, in a practical sense, how that would actually kind of look to bring forward this kind of relationship that leads to a better outcome for everyone.
We would try and make sure we understand the objectives of the developer, what it is they want to achieve ultimately. And then we would understand what are the aspirations of the community and what does a good development look like to them, who are the leaders in those specific areas that are the voice of the community. And then we would draw up all of those objectives on either side and see how we can then develop a way of meeting those objectives, or even, going beyond them. And so then we'd go step by step with a different, I have, for example, we have, so we'd get introduced to the project by the developer. This is what we want to do. And then we'll outline the project objectives with the developer together. And then we'd identify the key areas of focus, where we see the opportunities in connecting with the community lie. Then we would then outline, the social value opportunities that come up. And we affiliate the social value potentials with the opportunities. So we look at these opportunities and this potential from understanding the community. And then we'll identify the key collaborators. Who do we need to engage with from the stakeholders, developer stakeholder side, and the community? Who are the people who are critical to get to work together for this to be a success? And if those are a success, then everything else will be beyond. Then we develop the social value strategy. That's the feasibility study. So we would look at costs, timelines. We'd look at planning consents and other things that might come in the way of the objectives or the dream project. And then we'll identify what we need to overcome so that we can really be on a successful route. And then, we would, and once we do that, we in that process, we'll also be selecting the artists, the collaborators, or the stakeholders we want to appoint. Like, we need somebody of this expertise, somebody of this speciality needs to be there. This is a huge problem because of this historical element here that needs to be. So we'd look at who are the experts we need to draw into the team so that we can have the best chance of not having to compromise on the objectives that we are doing. When once we do that and we have a project that looks feasible in terms of costs, time, and planning, we would then work out a program. How is it going to run from the first day to the last day? Because some elements might be very important from the time you break ground, others, however small they are. So we create a work program across. And this work program is actually to make sure that, the objectives are met. And it's also to make sure that the strategies, sometimes some of the engagement of the community is through the process. So that process is right as well. And that, and then obviously coordinate and manage all the different aspects. People will most likely have never worked together again in the future. So there is no natural, like in projects, you've got the natural kind of my team and people know what they like and they just team ahead. So this is the challenges because people haven't worked together and they need to build trust within each other and they need to work seamlessly. So we would be able to gel all of that together to make it go through. And obviously, when we hand over, there's always the maintenance and the program. So, a lot of artworks are put out there without costing about how is it to maintain them, keep them clean. They look run down within a few years. Is the local maintenance team able to deal with this, or can we change the design? So we make sure that the client is aware about how to operate them, how to maintain them, and the ongoing project, other things that might happen in the future. So they're always going to be in our mind. If there's something that comes up we feel could fit in this super project, we would always have that in mind. So it's an ongoing process. And, and also looking in the end, the last is how is it used? Would love the best thing in any project, whether it's architectural big, is if you go there 3, 4, 5 years later, is it being used the way you envisaged? What's working really well? What can be improved, what can go on. So it's completely a 360 view. And I feel that's why we feel like the existing construction teams and communities don't have the tools to to carry that through. And that's why our art and architecture concept is very important, because there's will in both sides, but there is no processes or mechanisms of bringing that in a very pragmatic and practical way.
Shiro, thank you for that. It's a really, really great answer, and as you say, some really clear steps there about how you can go about this. And as you say, also some of the real challenges that come from doing this. You're trying to create, meaningful impact in places, in communities, with, people and all the dynamics that go with that. And one thing I'm really taking from this discussion is, it's just this kind of slow, process-based kind of approach to things that don't necessarily have an ending. And maybe they have some kind of vision and some objectives, but it's not necessarily about trying to get to a certain point. It's just kind of enabling things to happen. And so thank you for sharing all that with us. So on this podcast, we have a closing tradition, which is where a previous guest writes down a question for me to ask to you, and then after we wrap today, I'll get you to write one down for our next guest. So let's have a look at this one. Okay, so how do you think you most impact change in the world with what you do?
How I feel I'd impact change is by bringing people together in a way that they never thought they would ever work together. And then what might happen there on. Just the prospect of that, I think.
Great. Yeah, that's a really, really amazing answer. As you say, it's so succinct, and it just leaves so much kind of opportunity and so much openness in that. So thank you for that. And really appreciate you having me today at your amazing space. We haven't had time to kind of go around and look at all the amazing artwork here from your different collaborators, but really grateful for your time. So thanks, Shiro.
Thank you. It's been fantastic chatting with you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the People Grow Places podcast. For more information, visit growplaces.com and follow us at We Grow Places across all social channels. See you next time.